Welcome to Theme Weavers, your weekly wisdom for weaving yoga themes into your classes to inspire your students. We're your hosts, Heidi
and Farin. Welcome to episode 8 of Theme Weavers. Today we're going to talk about Ahimsa, the first Yama mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, which is found in Sutra 2.35. If you don't know what that is, or you want to learn about how to weave it through your class, then listen up. In case this is the first episode you're listening to, please check out episode 2 of Theme Weavers podcast for details and background on the structure of how and why to weave themes through your yoga classes. If you choose to use today's teaching on Ahimsa, nonviolence, as your theme, while using the gift of our Inspo sheet, then please find a way to turn our voices into yours. Make this theme authentic to your teaching style specifically.
Love that, Farin. Thank you for the reminder. So 2 weeks ago, we started talking about the 8 limbs of yoga, and we let you know that the first limb is about what Patanjali calls the yamas. So the yamas we mentioned are restraints. They're moral disciplines or practices that are mostly concerned with the world around us and also our interaction with it. There are 5 different yamas, these moral restraints that we practice to be living our yoga. So the first one is what we are talking about today, and it's called Ahimsa, which means nonviolence.
Non-violence. I feel like I'm a pro at that, Heidi.
Obviously.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not, because I did send you a song earlier today that was like kind of violent.
I mean, it wasn't really violent. It was just maybe not using the most nonviolent communication techniques to help me deal with a problem. But it was like definitely like Soul Sisters got my back. So I appreciated that. That felt very nonviolent. Like you had me.
I did. But I mean, in my life, I never use my hands or weapons and only my voice to share my feelings. I try to move bugs and spiders back into nature and not kill them when I see them in my house. And I'm also vegan because I don't want my eating habits to contribute to harm and pain to animals. And I do the best that I can do to not harm the earth. Like I recycle, I do all the things.
You drive an electric car?
I drive an electric car. I try to do all the things that keep me non-harming and stick to ahimsa. Is that all that it's about, Heidi?
I mean, yeah, it definitely teaches us about respect for all living things and speaks of avoiding violence towards others. So you're doing awesome. And the way you worded it makes it sound pretty easy, right? Well, maybe not that easy for a lot of people, but like the things that you mentioned are like achievable, doable things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you definitely do the obvious things and you're there, which is great. But it's also important to realize that although all the things you mentioned are part of living a nonviolent life, that ahimsa does go deeper, at least in my opinion. So let's first bring it into the practice when you're in class. So the physical practice. It's about not pushing your body beyond what it's capable of, and in doing so, possibly injuring yourself. Right? We all have these moments where we feel frustrated at times when our physical yoga practice doesn't progress as quickly as we'd like. So when we practice, we try to let go of thinking negatively about our bodies. We try to accept ourselves completely, no matter how strong or flexible we are at this moment. So, nonviolence in the physical sense here means we don't push ourselves over the edge. Of course, we definitely challenge ourselves to grow, leaning into that sometimes scary edge, but we never push ourselves past that edge to the point of harm. Who really cares if you can put your leg behind your head anyway, or hold a handstand long enough to please your ego, right? That's not really what's
Okay,
important. Yeah.
sometimes I do that though. So I guess that's when I'm not practicing ahimsa because I look around and I see other yoga teachers in handstands and I'm like, well, I'm a yoga teacher and I should be able to hold that handstand. And then I try to hold it and then I fall over and hurt myself. So
Yeah, that's not exactly practicing. You're not like 100% there, right? But that's why it's a practice, right? You're
mhm.
continuously engaging in this practice of swadhyaya, of self-study, and recognizing that, like, oh, whoops, I just totally was violent to myself, my body, my mind. My ego
Yeah.
sort of took over. And how cool that I have this practice of self-study that allows me to recognize I am out of alignment with how I want to be living, and I can make a little pivot back, right?
Yep.
That's cool. I mean, I haven't even talked about myself there, so I'm certainly not perfect when it comes to this either, but it's a practice, you know? And by respecting our boundaries and listening to our bodies, the practice becomes a little bit more sustainable. And we learn about ourselves with that practice of swadhyaya and that process. But Farron, what if we go even deeper? I was thinking about self-talk, right? The things we tell ourselves in our thoughts,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like, I think a lot of us have an easier time saying that we're not violent toward other people, but we can be so mean to ourselves. We tell ourselves that
Mhm.
we're not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not young enough. I'm too fat. I'm not flexible. I can't hold a handstand long enough, so I'm not a very good yoga teacher, right? Like we tell ourselves so many things that are so harmful and violent. And we say them to ourselves and we don't even know that we're saying it. And we would certainly never say it to anybody else.
Okay, yes. I always tell people to speak to themselves the way that they would speak to their best friend. But I usually apply this to running. Like, how would you talk to your running buddy? Because sometimes I can go out and have like a terrible run. I probably will sit there and tell myself, like, that was a crappy run. Like, you're so slow. You suck. But I would never say that to my running buddy. So then I have to remember and remind myself, Ahimsa, talk to myself as if I would talk to my running buddy, where I'd be like, it's okay. You had one bad run. It's all right. We'll keep going, run again tomorrow and see what happens. It could get better. So, yeah, that's my reminder.
I love that. And it's totally applicable to everything we do, not just running,
Yeah.
right? I had a really crappy day today. Uh,
You had a really crappy day
I
today.
did.
I can't
I did.
believe how bad your day was.
My day was so bad, and yet here I am with like a smile on my face, recognizing that like it was just a day. And I'm gonna try and talk as kindly to myself as possible in those moments where I wasn't, and those moments where I might not have been as kind to my children in the process. Like that's why it's a practice. We can begin again and use our supports to recognize, like, get back on track. Ahimsa, practice it to yourself, practice it to everyone you come into interaction with. It reminds us, though, to be gentle with ourselves, too, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We are all going to have insecurities and doubts. We're all going to experience lows like I did today. That's all part of life. But one of the greatest, most powerful gifts that we can give ourselves, I think, is to notice that and then change that negative self talk. And you talked about that a little bit last week, Farron, too, with your flip the script, where we can really pay attention to what we're saying, what we're feeling, and then recognize we can just whoop, flip it all around to the opposite and have a very different experience.
Hmm.
So, how does that translate to our time on the mat today? If we're doing this together in a class, every pose that we do can be done from a place of harming or non harming. You can allow yourself to move with love, not force. And at times when you notice your mind's going to a place of self talk, can you gently recognize that and then redirect the mind to the moment that we are in? Our breath, the feeling of the ground underneath you, the sensation of your big toe pressing into your mat. Nonviolence is a state of mind. And today, in our class, together, we can choose to shift our thoughts and actions to align with Ahimsa.
Yes. Ahimsa encourages peaceful and nonviolent communication, which can help us to resolve conflicts with compassion and empathy.
Weren't you just reading a book about that?
Yeah, we're reading Nonviolent Communication. It's an actual book. We read it for our book club that we host at our studio. And yeah, it's tough. That's a practice in itself of just communicating nonviolently. I thought that I was, and then I read that book and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm doing it all wrong." So it's a big practice.
It's a big one, but you helped me today when I needed to communicate something non-violently. And I was joking with Farron. I was calling her Chat Farron GPT because she was giving me the nonviolent responses to write into an email that needed to be done.
I was trying my
You
best.
did so good. You channeled your inner ahimsa. You resolved conflict. I hope. We'll find out.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, what else? What else does it help you with practicing ahimsa?
We can help reduce stress by practicing ahimsa and eliminate our emotional turmoil, leading to greater emotional well being because we're talking non-violently to ourselves and to others. Like, it's stressful when you're like actually talking violently to someone else, right? Like, it doesn't have to just be to yourself. Like, it stresses you out to have to like raise your voice.
Yeah,
So,
like your blood boils. You get that feeling, like your heart rate kind of, at least for me, like my heart rate starts to spike. I go sort of into fight or flight, right? Like, am I about to like run
yeah.
away from this person, or am I going to like aggressively have an interaction that makes me super uncomfortable? And like you have a physiological response.
Yeah, by learning to communicate nonviolently or just be a nonviolent human, practice non harming, then you can reduce your stress for sure and reduce that physiological response.
Mm.
Ahimsa also helps us with healthier relationships, reducing our harmful interactions and fostering trust and respect.
Tell me what else that practicing ahimsa can help us with.
We can improve our self image because we can see ourselves in a better light when we speak to ourselves with kindness.
These are great benefits. And I think it's really important to also recognize the flip side of that, right? What are the challenges that you might face when you practice ahimsa? So I think about this for a little bit because I struggled to think about the challenges we face when we try to live a life without violence because it just sounds so good, like not being violent. What's the challenge in that? That's great. But I came up with a few. So the first was about the challenge of self reflection. Practicing ahimsa requires introspection and self reflection, and that can be challenging and uncomfortable, right? Going inward and looking at ourselves and recognizing those times when we're not exactly either talking to ourselves kindly or treating somebody else the way that we think that we are or that we want to, or our desires are not lining up exactly with our intentions can be uncomfortable. So that's pretty hard to do. And it's also super hard to break habits. So when we let go of violent or harmful habits, whether it's our thoughts, our speech, our actions, it can be difficult. I even was just thinking about, you know, I drink alcohol and it was becoming a nightly habit. And I realized it wasn't very kind to myself because I was relying on something that wasn't great for my health in order to fall asleep at night. And I decided to break that habit and to start living like a very clean, sober lifestyle. And it's been over 2 months now. But that first month,
Yay, go Heidi. Go
yeah,
sober
go
Heidi.
sober Heidi. But that whole first month was like really hard because it would have been easier to take the easy route. It would have been easier to harm myself because I would have just like slept without a challenge, or I would have been able to have an easier time numbing out and not having to feel challenging and harmful things. You can just numb it rather than having to actually work through it. So breaking a habit takes a lot of effort and it's challenging. And even if it's going to be a good outcome in the end, it's still hard in that process. Okay, another one. This one was a little bit tough for me to come up with, but when we have violent or negative external influences in our lives, we can feel pressure or influence in our lives that encourage aggression or violence. This one was a little bit tough, right? Because it's hard to break off relationships that are not necessarily positive for us, but it's really important. And it means that we might have to shift the way that we live our lives. And this could be due to the culture that you live on that's putting pressure on you to live or receive things in a violent way. Or this might be related to your own choices about who you associate with. But when you have something that's giving you that external influence, you have to be willing to make a cut with it or make a shift and deal with the discomfort of that. And that could mean major life changes.
That can be really tough if it's like your family. Like if your family just like speaks to each other in a violent way or even like is physically violent, then it's hard because you literally have to like break up with your family sometimes to get away from it.
Yeah, or like a friend that is all of a sudden finding this unhealthy pattern where they're putting you down to build themselves up, or there's so many things that just sort of like sneak in, you don't recognize that it's happening, and then once you're aware of it, you got to go through the challenge of making a shift if you want to be practicing and living with ahimsa.
Yeah.
So that's basically around this idea of extricating yourself from these influences. And that can also mean that you have to challenge and confront difficult relationships, right? It might mean that we have to address these challenging or toxic relationships and make major life changes that we might not be ready for. But to fully practice, you got to be willing to do the things you're not always ready for and jump in.
Man, there's a whole lot of things we're doing in this yoga class today.
Changing lives, changing lives.
Yeah, let's talk about the results that you experience when you do this hard work. We can have improved ability to peacefully resolve conflicts and disputes with anyone around us, not just our family and friends, but even strangers. We can gain more compassion. We have the cultivation of empathy towards ourselves and others. We can find enhanced emotional well being and reduce our stress, like I talked about before. We can have healthier and more peaceful relationships and that sense of inner peace and equanimity.
I love that. Those are all such amazing benefits that make the challenges worth it. now you're doing the class and you have to come up with your thematic through line to weave through it to keep dropping the hammer throughout. So a few I came up with that I would use if this was the class I'm teaching today were things like respect your boundaries and listen to your body, learn about yourself through the lens of ahimsa. As you know, I love to also ask questions of students as a thematic through line. So, how are you talking to yourself right now? Are your thoughts full of violence, or are you able to see yourself through a lens of love and compassion? Another one would be like, keep your eyes and your mind on your mat today. Drop the comparison to others or what you once could do, which also that same thematic through line can happen for other themes also, now that I say that, which,
Asteya.
yeah, spoiler alert, it's coming up. And practice ahimsa, nonviolence in, and like fill in the blank. You're in trikonasana, triangle pose or something. Practice ahimsa, nonviolence in your triangle. Just looping it into what you're doing right then.
Yeah. So if you download our inspo sheet found at themeweaversyoga.com/episode 8, we list all of these things out for you. And on that sheet, we also have some inspirational quotes that remind us of the practice of ahimsa. We have some songs on there to bring the theme to life. We have mantra, mudra, pranayama, a few different postures, and even a metta meditation to weave into your class. It's really great.
Those are great, especially in times like today and what we're living through in this world. Meta meditations are so powerful, so powerful.
Yes, so good. As for a peak pose, perhaps anything that encourages heart opening in a non-violent way. Maybe your peak pose could be wheel, but you layer the postures that help you to open your heart and help you recognize what you're able to do right now without pushing yourself past the point of where you should be in your body.
Yeah, and reminding students that just because you're offering wheel as the peak pose does not mean you actually have to press up into wheel pose, because is that going to be a violent action for your body today? Where are you at right now? And honor that rather than pushing.
Love it.
Yeah, so then as you wind down your physical practice and prepare to walk off of your mat, you can really start to notice how your yoga practice doesn't have to end. Every moment that you take is an opportunity to create a new way of showing up in your life, a new opportunity to bring awareness to exploring ahimsa and showing up for ourselves and others in a space of nonviolence. As you walk off your mat, you can set an intention of exploring beyond the asana to continue your practice of ahimsa, the first yama that brings about a life of nonviolence.
Now you can go to our website, themeweaversyoga.com/episode 8 to grab the inspo sheet for Ahimsa to help you bring this theme alive in your own voice, in your own practice and teaching. Then reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or email and let us know how it lands with your students. We're here to support you, fellow yoga teacher, in your class preparation and delivery, so let us know how we can be of the most support. Tune in next week for another episode of Theme Weavers, where we'll help you be prepared to inspire your students in your next class. Until next time.
We leave you in peace.